a little something really good.
Okay. Super excited, like I was telling you guys last week. We're going to follow a principle called first mention. Have you guys heard that in Bible study? Okay. First mention is one of my favorite study techniques, and it's where you start at the first place the word is used. And that's how I figured out that the first place that the Hebrew word kabod for the glory of God was used was in relation to wealth. In the story of Jacob basically outwitting his father-in-law Laban. And I think it's Genesis 21, and Laban's son said that Jacob has stolen our father's glory or wealth, and it's the same Hebrew word. So that kicked off this entire study of how wealth is tied to the glory, that it's something that's very important for Christians to learn to steward and use well. Well, we're going to start with Genesis 18, which is a first place favor is used. And it's, I'm going to go ahead and read out the New King James Version, but it says, "My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass by on your servant." And this story is so neat. We're going to grab some principles here because it gives us a good idea of what favor looks like and how it can be conditional in our lives. Because, like I always like to tell people, the love of God is not. It's unconditional. But the favor of God is conditional. And we'll look at ways to get it going. One is generosity, kindness, integrity, righteousness. The assignment you have often will elicit the favor that you need in order to complete it. Because if you didn't have the favor, you wouldn't be able to complete your assignment. I think also, with Ernie's situation that we prayed over last week, and even the Lord, it pleased the Lord, it pleased the Father for Jesus to suffer for us. So there was a greater call on his life, and that was us, really. And the Lord knew that. So when he was on the cross, it didn't appear that he was favored, right? Because he was suffering, but he was favored so that we could be favored, if that makes sense. So he opened up a door for favor to be in our lives. And so anyway, but this instance right here that we're going to read in verse 1 of Genesis 18 is one of the several appearances that Abraham had with God. There was a total of 9. 9 times he either saw the pre-incarnate form of Jesus, which means birth, or he had an encounter with God, like in the furnace, and he walked in between the animals that were, cut in half. So here it says, "Then the Lord," which is the word Yahweh, "appeared to him by the terebinth trees at Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. He lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground and said, 'My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree.'" Which, by the way, terebinth trees are pretty much like oak trees, in case y'all are ever wondering. I wonder these things. I'm like, what the heck is a terebinth tree? It's like an oak tree. "And I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant." And they said, "Well, go ahead and do what you've said." So the word Yahweh is the most sacred name of God. In fact, when they would, copy the ancient scripture onto scrolls, when they got to Yahweh, if I'm not mistaken, because I know you probably know this from the background you've studied, where they would get a new pen, they would write it, but not all of it. So that's why there's no vowels. Plus, I don't think, are there vowels in Hebrew at all? Yeah. So they would not write the full name because they didn't want to make a mistake and blaspheme his name or take it in vain. And then they would do a new pen for the rest of it. So that's how sacred, yeah. So when the Lord, I don't know if you guys ever wondered why this was such a weird thing. When the Lord was in the garden and the soldiers came to him and they were going to arrest him, and they said, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And in the New King James, in most Bibles, it says, I am he, but they put the word he in italics, which means that was not what he said. He said, I am. So he was giving the Yahweh name. And then what happened is when he said, I am, it knocked the soldiers down. So they were basically slain in the spirit or the power of his confession. Isn't that not crazy? So then they all get up.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's in John.
Is it in John?
I think it might be in John. And not only that, but there's also this weird young man running around naked in the story. And I'm like, what's happening? Why is this,
Is this okay?
Yeah, why is he running around? Where's his clothes? Well, Rick Renner, who's a Greek scholar, he talked about how this young man had actually, when it says he had like a linen cloth, but he was naked other than that, it was that Greek word is grave cloth.
Ooh.
He was dead, and when the Lord said, I am, it accidentally raised him from the dead. So he's in the garden trying to figure out why the heck he's alive and what's going on. And so then when they saw him, they wanted to arrest him, and then he took off running. Can you imagine Mama's surprise?
Right.
Probably need to resurrect her after that. But anyway, so there's power in that name. It's very holy. All that to say that Abraham knew he was seeing Yahweh. Okay? So he is seeing God. The Lord appeared, Yahweh appeared to him by the, we'll just say oak trees. And then in Jesus, in John 8:56, he referred to Abraham seeing him and possessing a revelation of him coming to the earth in the future. We also know Paul talked about in Hebrews chapter 11 that Abraham lived out the parable of Jesus becoming man and coming as Jesus by going to sacrifice his son Isaac. So he lived out the story. And that's why he had so much confidence when he said, I know that he will be resurrected. So it's interesting how they had that prophetic insight to see into the future. And it had to have come from an intimacy with God. It had to come from an intimacy. That's why it's so important to know him. And then the word appeared here in the Hebrew means he saw him with his physical eyes. Also with Yahweh, or a pre-incarnate form of the Lord, were two angels. And they came in human form as well. Abraham immediately recognized who he was because he had seen him before. And then he runs out to meet him, and then he bows down. So the word bow is the word worship. Okay? So he, basically the word is when you see a monarch or a superior, you bow, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what he was doing. He recognized, okay, he has visited me again. He's here. He's obviously with some, friends of his, some companions, and he immediately bowed. We know from scripture that if this was not a pre-incarnate form of the Lord, that he would have been rebuked. Because if it was a human or an angel, Abraham would have been rebuked for worshiping him. We see that in Revelation, where when John, because they're in glorified states, right? So he's seeing this vision, and he's seeing, Christians that had gone on before, and he's seeing angels, and he bowed down to worship, and they rebuked him and said, get up, I'm a brother like you. And so that's what Abraham's doing, is he is bowing to his monarch. He recognizes that his king has shown up. And it's amazing because it was just in the mundane, ordinary part of the day when he has this visitation. Now, in this place of recognition and worship, Abraham made a request within the context of the favor. He's like, don't pass me by. In other words, let's spend some time together and visit. I love that. That type of heart is extremely attractive to the Lord. You know, we can go to church, we can do all the Christian disciplines, but what gets his attention is a heart that wants to spend time with him, with nothing else on the agenda. Okay? So let's break down some of the principles that Abraham shows us. Number one, God showed up in the mundane and heat of the day. Okay, so you never know when he's going to show up in your life, and you never know when his favor is going to show up. But once you see it, you'll recognize it. So the word mundane is defined as common, ordinary, banal, unimaginative, of or relating to this world or earth, as contrasted with heaven. That was in the dictionary.com definition. It's worldly and earthly. So a synonym for mundane is secular. So what this tells us is that in this moment, when Jesus showed up, Abraham was in the least spiritual state possible. He wasn't sitting there thinking about God. He wasn't, well, I mean, he might have been. But, he's just, it's hot. He's sitting outside maybe to catch a little bit of a breeze. And then, bam, there he is.
Wow.
Right? That has happened to me so many times. I remember when I've heard God most clearly, typically I'm either cleaning or, in the shower or driving in my car or watching the news. And I'm not even thinking about anything spiritual. And then, bam, he decides to show up. So that, to me, I absolutely love, because it brings this aspect of ready or not, here I come, where you get that added benefit of delight. You get that added benefit of surprise. I'm here, let's visit. I love that, because God hates being in boxes. He hates it. He is very adventurous. He loves to delight us. So most of the times his motivation is to bring us delight. Isn't that cool? Okay, then the word banal, I'm like, what the heck does that mean? It means devoid of freshness or originality. So basically it's bored. Abraham may have been bored. So I don't want us to miss, as far as today, the idea that God can show up in the most boring, mundane, ordinary, least spiritual part of our day. Okay? So always, be on the lookout for him. Now, there's no distinction in his mind between sacred and secular as to why he shows up. The church has created this idea that there's a difference between the secular and the sacred, unfortunately. The Bible does not differentiate. I think we've talked about this before, where Paul said, if you're lazy, you need to get a job, and that word means that person was not in their ranks as far as employment in the marketplace. So for Paul, working was as spiritual as prayer time or Bible reading. And then you have the verse that says, do all your work as unto the Lord. It's the same thing. That word work is what you do to earn wages, but it's also from a word that means to worship. So for God, our work and worship are the same. Laundry is sacred. I mean, taking care of your home, taking care of your car, all of these things are sacred to God because he doesn't compartmentalize. Everything is whole. And of course, now if we're being stinkers, or if we're outside, what would be prescribed sacredness, then of course, he may still show up, but it might be for a spanking. And then the second thing of why I think he likes to show up in the mundane is he loves invading our earth with his heaven. And in Matthew 6:10, it says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, the other thing that I want to point out with Abraham as a good example is he had trained his senses to recognize his presence and visitations, okay? Which is such an indictment against the Pharisees because they did not recognize the time of their visitation. And it's important to understand knowledge does not equal recognition. People can have all the knowledge in the world, and then when God shows up, they will explain it away, or I don't know how that could happen, or you need to tell your people to quit saying, you're the king. And he's like, well, even the rocks will cry out. This is a time of visitation. they could do the math that Daniel gave them in chapter 9 to the day of when the Lord would go into Jerusalem on the donkey. They had the math, and they still refused to believe that he was the Messiah. Do you guys know that healing the blind was a miracle that only the Messiah was going to do? It had never been done before, and that was one of the signs. And they still refused. Okay? So we want to make sure that we don't have just head knowledge, but heart knowledge, and we train our physical senses to recognize, as well as our spiritual senses to recognize when he shows up. Because again, he shows up in the mundane, he shows up in the ordinary. Jesus looked like an ordinary man, and so did his angels. And it's the same principle like when Moses, is out in the desert and you've got the burning bush. The burning bush wasn't unusual. Combustion in the desert was a common occurrence. But what was unusual is that it wasn't consuming the bush, right? So we have to look for God talking to us in the midst. Hello.
12:30, right?
Nope, it's 12.
Oh my gosh.
Here you go. It's all right.
Sorry,
So we have to be like the principle of Moses looking at the burning bush is you need to take a second look. Okay? So if something looks normal but is a little bit unusual, take a second look. Is that toilets flushing or something?
That's what it sounds like.
Okay. I've heard it a couple times.
Nobody else is reacting, and finally you did. It's like, okay, it's not
Yeah,
just
no,
me.
it's not just you, but I was like, okay, that's.
So I want to make sure, did you guys hear me? Because it's very
Very good.
important to recognize God in the normal, because the normal is going to look normal enough where you may miss it. So you got to take a second glance. So when Moses saw the burning bush, he probably kept on going, and he was like, wait a minute, the bush isn't being consumed. And then he went back, and then it says, when the Lord saw Abraham turn to see, he started speaking. It's the same thing when the Lord was walking on the water. Can you imagine? I mean, I'd be like, what is going on here? But they thought it was a ghost. But the Bible tells us that when they called out to him is when he stopped and went to them. So one way to get favor is when you see him close, don't keep going. Don't just like, oh, that's nice that he did that. Stop and ask, okay, I acknowledge you just did something pretty amazing. Is there anything else I need to know? Do you have anything to share? I would like to share how awesome it was. You know what I mean? It's like you're pausing in your day. It reminds me of I used to do a class called Genius Marriage. And in it, I was talking about the research. It's called the Love Lab, and I think it's up in Utah. And this guy has studied happy marriages for like 25 years. And in the Love Lab, he noticed couples that had been together like they're either new or they've been together like 30, 35 years. They started doing same things. And one of the things is, let's say you have the wife and she's reading a magazine or on her phone. The husband might be doing, like looking out the window. He's like, oh, look at this. And the wife will put down her item, go over there to look. And then once they have that brief exchange, she'll then go back to her task. Versus people that never look up from their phones or never stop to go see what interested the other. And so it's this break in routine where when God shows up, you don't just go back to what you were doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You need to acknowledge, you need to engage, because this is a moment. So Paul instructed us to entertain strangers unaware, because you never know if you're going to be entertaining angels. Personally, with my true crime podcast, I probably will not be entertaining any strangers unaware. However, I can definitely be strategic and definitely be alert to, okay, is this an angelic situation here? So that just proves and I wanted to give that to you guys, that the Lord showed up with angels. They all look like normal men. Okay? But also for you guys that are hospitable, this is easy for you. For people like me that I've had to learn it and I still forget, hospitality needs to be a core value. It needs to be a way of life, because like if you look at John in his first, second, and third letters, he said, the only unifying factor among Christians is their love for one another. So we've got this love for one another command, And then we have the fact that you might be entertaining angels unaware. And so hospitality is I guess you would say, an outflow or sourced in love. Okay? And so it needs to be a core value for us because it's just who we are now with Jesus in us. And of course, Romans 5:5, it's not in your notes, but it says that when we are born again, we have Holy Spirit, he pours his love abroad in our hearts. And so we have it, just doesn't always feel like it, especially if someone's dumb. You know what I'm saying? Then you have to really go deep to feel that love. So we need to learn to recognize them in the most mundane in those times that just seem different. Pause and give your attention to those times because it might be a time of visitation for you where God wants to release his favor and promise in an unprecedented way. The third thing is Abraham followed protocol. Okay, so this is really important. He paused the ordinary and then he ran to meet and worshiped. This is also the first place the Hebrew word shaka, I guess is how you say it, or shakah, is used for the word worship. So you have this word for worship used for the first time favor is used in the Bible. So the two go together. And again, it means to pay homage, to bow down to a superior or to a king. And it's also the act of respect and allegiance made by a vassal to his lord. So a vassal is basically a servant. So during feudal times, the vassal was the one who was granted use of the land. Okay? We know that Abraham was granted use of the land. That's why the Middle East is such an interesting thing, because Israel doesn't own the land. The Middle East doesn't own the land. God owns the land. So that's why out of all the land in the earth, that's the one he's coming back to, and that's the one that he's going to defend because that's his land. Now we know that all the earth is his, right? And he's coming to take it all. But there's something special about that strip of land. What's special about it is it was given to Abraham, his friend. So God, I don't know if you guys have ever done this where I've been willing to box because someone went against my family or a friend. Mm-hmm. It's like, what do we need to do? Let's go. That's how the Lord is. When you touch one of his people, you touch the apple of his eye, which is literally when he looks at us, we are in his eye. We're in his vision. It's like when you look at someone, you can see a little tiny part of yourself, right? In their pupil. That's exactly what he's talking about. So that's why we have to pray for our enemies, guys, because when people come against us, they're not coming against us. They're coming against him. Mm. And that's why we've got to pray for them because they could be in big time trouble. So the earth belongs to the Lord. He's granted us the privilege of breathing his air. And Abraham knew his place and he knew who was the ruler of heaven and earth. Therefore, he bowed down in the deepest respect and reverence, which means he probably actually was on the ground, on his belly. More than likely, because that also means to lie prostrate. So he wanted to communicate his understanding of these facts. But what I love about it is he did not allow his honor and worship of him to negate his boldness. Okay? So worship of him does not minimize your boldness. We can come boldly before the throne of grace, right? So that's important to understand. We always have to remember who God is, but at the same time, we need to remember who we are and we're his children. So, just like children are, mom, and they'll beg, they'll just go in and get stuff. I remember when my son moved with his wife, for a while, me and my ex-husband, we were looking for things. And we're like, well, Kent must have taken it without even telling us, because that's what kids do. And sure enough, we found it in their house and, we were able to recapture, our spoils. But that's what kids do, and that's what he expects. Remember, I command you to ask at once what you desire. So we have respect, but we also understand our position. And then number 4, he used his favor to serve him. This is probably my favorite. It's one of the most astounding parts of the story. Abraham, at this point, had several encounters. He already knew he had his favor. But instead of using the favor for himself, he used it as a request to serve him better. Isn't that amazing? Like he wanted to serve him water and food. He wanted to wash his feet, which was an act of hospitality back, in those days, because your, sandals, you get like mud and sand and all kinds of different things on your feet. So he wanted to refresh his heart and the angels' hearts by serving them. And, I've talked to people, I know lots of people that have anywhere from millions to dozens of millions to multiple hundreds of thousands. And I always try to buy their lunch.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
I do.
Because everyone wants something. Everyone wants something. And so when you show up as that one, let me bless you, right? I had one person say, no one ever offers to buy me my lunch. And I was doing it at a time where I had all that debt. But I knew that's what I was supposed to do. And so that's what is happening here, where you've got the king. Most people are going to ask. It's kind of like if you're a doctor, everyone wants to know what you would do to treat this or that. It's like he could have immediately gone into, why are you here? Hey, while you're here, can I get, he could have immediately done that. But nope, he just wanted to serve them, and he wanted to refresh his heart. History is full of examples of those whose hearts turned toward apathy once they experienced God's favor and blessing. Where they were once humble and self-sacrificing, they began to flaunt his favor and his blessing. Hezekiah, he's a perfect example of this. God blessed Hezekiah with favor because he reminded him of David. And then Hezekiah gets sick, and he had the heart of David, and he shifted a nation from rote and religious performance to heart-centered worship. But once he was healed, he then opened all the blessing and favor up to the Babylonians. That's what caused them to invade later, okay? So he basically invited the door to the enemy. And when God warned him about what he did through Isaiah the prophet, he was relieved that at least while he was alive, he wouldn't be judged. Isn't that incredible? So one thing that's important with favor is you have to learn to steward it, because most marriages fail once a couple reaches wealth. Most people self-sabotage when they reach success. People that are spiritual when they first started out and humble get prideful and elitist when they're successful in ministry. And my prayer has been for years, Lord, if I ever get that stupid, just take me out. I am giving you full permission. Be ruthless with me. Do whatever you have to do, because I never want to bring, dishonor. And that's one reason, even though I could probably buy what I want, I'll ask him to bring it to me. Even though, I could hide my faults, I share them anyway. I mean, there's things you can do that keep yourself humble, because it's kind of the principle, you don't want the rock falling on you and crushing you, right? So you want to make sure you're staying humble. And I know being a D, pride and anger can be the most, the weakest parts. So we're natural born leaders. And because of that, we have to be really careful not to get, all prideful. So we want to be really careful with that. Abraham, he was different. He never used his favor and blessings. And by the way, did y'all know he's a billionaire? He was an absolute billionaire. So was Job.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Tomi Irayomi he calculated the wealth for all the patriarchs. The majority of them were billionaires. Job was the richest. I think his was 200 and something billion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just, and the favor attracts wealth. So it's important to understand that too when that starts happening. So when he rescued Lot and the other people from those kings, the 5 kings, they wanted to give him wealth. And he's like, oh no, because if I take the spoils from you, then you will say that you made Abraham rich. So he knew his source of wealth was God, right? So he did give it to his men, though. He's like, well, you can give it to them, but I'm not going to take anything. So favor and blessing is always to serve the Lord first and empower others, which I like that. Favor covers you for the sake of your assignment, not for your sake alone. We are designed to enjoy his favor and blessings, but never at the expense of the greater purpose, which is invading others' ordinary and mundane worlds with an encounter. So we want to spread the wealth, but also understand that favor can make people and spread the favor, but it can make people jealous. So don't be surprised if people start acting like fools around you. That's you. I'm just, you do you. I'm going to be over here. Now, this encounter is a picture of sweet intimacy between the Lord and his friend Abraham. Abraham's heart was free of any guile or greed. He simply wanted to spend time with the one he loved. The highest use of favor is to increase intimacy between you and him. So I suggest you pursue that. Take advantage of the favor he's given you just to spend time with him. No requests, no striving or works. Just sit with him in your ordinary day. Visit with him like you do with your closest friends. And refresh his heart because he likes you. Okay? A lot of people don't believe that. Everybody can say, well, I know he loves me. Yeah, but do you know he likes you? That's very important. Okay? Now, Abraham hurries to Sarah, cook up the best. Like he gets the best, calf that's tender and good, the best of everything. Gathers some of his, butter and his milk, serves the Lord and his companions. So it's at this point that now God responds to Abraham's ministry. He responded first with the promise. So he says, basically your wife's going to get pregnant, have a kid. Of course, Sarah's like, and he's like, why'd you laugh? I didn't laugh. Like that whole exchange. But, which I'm sure freaked her out. Now, after this, here's what's incredible. The favor of the Lord on Abraham, the reason for the visit pops up. He was about to go to Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? So out of all the people he could have gone to, he picks Abraham. And he, God comes to his friend. He shares what's going to happen because he knew that Abraham was going to intercede. Now think about this. The God of the universe, okay, comes in a pre-incarnate form. And his first stop is Abraham. Okay? So picture it. President Trump, if you don't like him, sorry, I do. President Trump, say he comes to town, he makes a stop at my house. Well, what's happening? Let me show you all my Trump stuff. Like I'd be pulling everything out.
Let's do some heavy-revy.
Yeah. So it's like, that's the picture here. You have a king on his way to conduct king business, and he decides to make a pit stop to visit his friend. It's incredible. And so he stops, and then he tells them, I've heard the reports of the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. So he came to investigate to see if it was as bad as the reports. This is the example I use for judgy people. Now, let me explain what I'm talking about. Judgment is a requirement of believers, meaning if we see or discern something among believers that is harmful to the group or to the believer, we're supposed to judge that, meaning, hey, let's sit down and talk. Like this behavior, like drinking too much or doing drugs or gossip or anger or whatever it is, we have that conversation. That's a judgment that is meant to restore. The one that we're not given the right to do in this moment is where you condemn someone to hell or you condemn someone in a way where they're irrecoverable. Now, if someone blasphemes Holy Spirit, that pretty much settles that. But other than that, everything is, off limits. That's God's idea and his deal. So when you've got God who doesn't take the outcries, he doesn't take the news, he instead comes to check out and see if the reports are true, how much more should we? So if you look at, again, Ernie's situation, what was that? They didn't have the decency to ask questions, to verify if what they were hearing was true. So you know what that tells me? There's other motives. If you really care about people, you actually want to check it out. So when I'm like working at chamber stuff, client stuff, whatever it is, if I hear reports, I'm immediately going to the other person to get the down low, talking to the other person, and then I'm able to piece a story together and then reconcile people and be like, hey, what that person said about that person, that's not accurate. And then sometimes it is, and you just note that. But we need to understand that I love these people, therefore I'm going to investigate. If I didn't care about them, okay, y'all go ahead and fight amongst yourselves. I don't care. I don't have any dog in this fight. So we need to make sure that in our judgments, it's coming from a place of, number one, discernment. Discernment is always centered in love. So if you don't like a person, if you have a problem with a person, you need to question your discernment, okay? And you may be accurate, just put it on the shelf until you know your heart is free from any offense or anything that could skew it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So he tells him what's going on. And then he says this statement, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm doing? That's amazing. Since Abraham shall surely become a great mighty nation, for I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken. Okay, so we do know Abraham interceded for Sodom and Gomorrah, and unfortunately he couldn't find 10 favorable. Now, one thing that I wanted you guys to know is Abraham, the way God based their friendship was Abraham's obedience to his voice. Okay, when I hear people say, oh, I love God, and their life reduces that love to what they might have for pizza or ice cream, then I know that's not real love. Because with God, you do what he says, even if it hurts, right? So that's how he gauges love. Those who love me do what I say. And so Abraham did what he said, but did you also notice it's generational? Because God always thinks generational. He's never just right now. He's like, I'm going to tell Abraham what I'm up to. He's my friend. And I've known him, and I know that he's going to teach his children and their children the same things. So we want to think about that. People need to have a vision of who God is that they can pass to their children. Because I guarantee you, the schools, the colleges, society, culture, they're going to undermine in any way they can what God looks like. Yeah. And they're going to make him seem unjust, or passive, or he doesn't care, or he doesn't exist, or he made us this way or that way, or whatever it is. We have to make sure we have that accurate picture. And unfortunately, I don't find many Christians that do. Many Christians don't like themselves. Many Christians think that God doesn't like them. There's like these ideas that if you're not careful can pass down to our kids, and then they won't know him the way they should. When I was raising Kent, the Lord said, your sole responsibility is to raise him to know me and my voice. I was like, okay. So that was the filter. That's what I did the whole time. And then it backfired on me when he said, Mom, I want to thank you so much that you've taught me to hear God's voice, because I know we're supposed to move to DC. Hold up. Let's kind of roll back some of this good teaching here. I mean, do you have to listen every time? Now, here's some more favor principles for you guys. God responds to our favor with more favor. It's impossible to outfavor God. Okay, once it starts, it just keeps going. So Abraham's favor toward God was really his most reasonable and required service, but his heart motive was to refresh his heart. And then, when you think about it, it's like he knew him so well. Like, I wonder, when the Lord was there, because he doesn't say a lot of words, did Abraham pick up on the weightiness in his heart? Like, did he pick up on the fact that he was doing something that weighed upon him? He's about to destroy, at least 2 towns. I think there are 5 total. And everybody's going to die. So did he pick it up? I know all of you have had those friends or family members where you're around them and you can tell instantly. And you're like, what's going on? How are you doing? I wonder if he picked that up. I tend to lean that he did, because Abraham saw him face to face several times. And the word where it talks about Moses, that how he didn't speak to Moses in parables, but he spoke to him face to face, literally means the tone of voice. So Moses did not see God's face, because no one can see it and live, right? But he could know his mood and emotions by hearing his tone of voice. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you call your Kent, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. You know, or Kent, what are you doing? I mean, all the tone. Yeah, and some of you are really sensitive to tone. You know what I mean? You could tell when someone's like looking at you like you're an idiot and they say something and you're like, excuse me, you know.
I'm so good at that.
Yeah, we can pick it up. So that he knew the tone of voice, and I believe that he probably knew he was on a heavy assignment. And it needs, I mean, here Abraham's not even in the old covenant. He's like pre-Moses, and he has this ability. That's the picture for us. Favor is conditional. You know, we've talked about this. God's love is unconditional because it's transformative. Okay, so it has to be given no matter what. It's an active ingredient in our transformation. If we could earn it, then there'd be no reason for him to come. So Jesus met those requirements so that we could have it. But favor is attracted to certain activities and characteristics. God states a very important one here. Abraham's intentional education of his family to keep the way of the Lord. Okay, that attracted his favor. It was very different from just knowing his acts. So you've got in the Israelites, Moses knew his ways, Israel knew his acts or his miracles, and God wants us to know his ways. So if you have a miracle, one of my favorite things to do is, okay, what way are you showing me here? Like, I want to know, like, what were you thinking? What were you doing? Why did you do it now and not before? And like, I want to know those things because we need to be spiritual scientists. We need to be, you know, God investigators where it's like, we don't just say, oh, thank you. It's like, what were you thinking when you did it that way? You know, like, what was going on in your mind, right? And then also, he said, right to do righteousness and justice. So those that live that way, that is a condition of favor. And so if you live your life and make your decisions, then that's going to attract it as well. And then also notice that Abraham had a part in the promise being fulfilled, because he said that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. In our ideas that God is in control, which I would like to challenge that with God is in charge, when we have that perspective, we pass the buck onto God, that everything is him, when the reality is the promises being fulfilled in our lives are actually dependent on us. And so it's very important that we do the things that are necessary so that he can do the things he wants to do. My proof of this is when Jesus went to his hometown and he wanted to, do some miracles there. He said he could only lay hands on a few people because they could not get past whose son he was, right? They couldn't get past this teenager that got pregnant with them out of wedlock. So because of their unbelief and their perception of him, he couldn't hardly do anything. So we can limit God's activity in our lives due to passivity, lack of awareness, ignorance of his ways and who he is, etc. There's so many things that can cause us to miss out. So don't be passive, always be active. And then the final is his favor surrounds the assignment. So the Lord decided not to hide from Abraham what he was doing there because he was going to be a great and mighty nation. So for the Lord, he was speaking with someone who was also the ruler of a nation. Okay, so there was a protocol that the Lord was following, which I find very interesting. So here's some scriptures for you guys to ponder as far as favor over the next week. I love the Passion Translation of Psalm 89:17. It says, the glory of your splendor is our strength, and your marvelous favor makes us even stronger, lifting us even higher. So I want to make sure you guys understand. The glory of God's splendor is when we are strong. But we've got a double access because when we're weak, he's strong in us. So we really have no reason to be weary, and we really have no reason to be weak. If we're weak and weary, we're probably doing a bunch of stuff we don't need to, or trying to do a bunch of stuff without him. Okay? So make sure you're staying centered in your source. And then Psalm 102:13-14. You will arise and have mercy on Zion, for the time to favor her, yes, the set time has come. For your servants take pleasure in her stones and show favor to her dust. Did you notice once again the favor was dependent on the response of his people? So the decree that the time to favor Zion was because her servants and his servants took pleasure and had favor for her. Isn't that crazy? And then Daniel 7:22, until the Ancient of Days came. Sorry, I didn't even think to give you a paper.
Put it in my phone as you're talking.
And a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time for the saints came for the saints to possess the kingdom. And then Luke 1:30, then the angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. So these are all examples of favor surrounding assignments, and it's given to those he trusts. So if you're experiencing favor in your life, you have come to a place of trust. I think all of us, everyone that's born, can access what's called common grace and even common favor. So common grace is it rains on the just and the unjust. Okay, that's common. When you get into Christianity, we now access grace that transforms, right? With favor, I think it can be the same. There's a lot of favor on people like Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, even Joe Rogan. They're tapping into a common favor. Have you wondered how? Anyone? See, I wonder these things. They're speaking truth. Mm-hmm. Favor is attracted to truth. There's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just truth. And even people can unknowingly, that don't know God, operate in truth. So when you have someone like Joe Rogan saying, hey, we need Jesus, and he doesn't know him, like he's obviously seeing something more than the people of God. So that there's a common favor, and then there's a favor given to us, right? So I just wanted to let you guys know that when you see his favor show up, you just got to smile a little bit, guys, because that means he's entrusted something to you. And that means you've got an assignment. And so you're not on a shelf. You're not too young, not too old, not old or young. All of us have an assignment, and we need his favor. Okay. So next week's, I'm going to show you guys how you can stun God. It's amazing. It's amazing. So I think that's